All right, our next topic is going to be on invertebrate characteristics, and we're going to start with the topic of symmetry. So most invertebrates have what we call either radial or bilateral symmetry, and there are a lot of different morphologies and different kind of looks to invertebrate animals. So jellyfish have simple radial and symmetry here. All of these three things here are life cycle parts of a jellyfish. They start as a polyp and then move to the Sophria and then move to an adult. You can see that they're kind of like from the top and bottom, they have all of these different chunks, and if you cut them anywhere along these chunks, they will be symmetrical. This is an example of radial symmetry, or like circular symmetry. Octopuses, on the other hand, there's only one way you can cut this thing and get half and half. If you try to cut it the other way, you're going to have eyes on one half and no eyes on the other half. So this guy he's bilateral. You could only cut him one direction. Some other things that we see inside of invertebrates are segmentation. This is when you have a body that is composed of a series of repeating units. The simplest kind of segmentation is in earthworms, where all of these segments look the same and have the same job. In arthropods, you start to see some ways that the animals get creative with segmentation, where all of these numbers here, 1 through 8, are segments that they're fused together to form what we call the cephalothorax here. And then the same thing with the abdomen is a whole bunch of sections. But also for segmentation, all of these like little legs look the same, have around the same job. They can get kind of funky though when they get like claws and stuff that are segmented like these, but just have a little bit different adaptation. Some other characteristics, invertebrates have to support their body. They found some cool ways to do so. If they live in water, they usually are fluid filled. If you go and you buy a sponge in the store and it's a natural sponge, you are using the leftover skeleton of an animal to wash your dishes. Some invertebrates have an exoskeleton like this scorpion here, which is a rigid outer covering that protects the soft, tissuey parts of the animal. This can be found in crayfish, it can be found in crabs, all of your arthropods, lots of different things that use exoskeletons. The downside of an exoskeleton like this is in order for these organisms to grow, they have to shed their skin, they have to molt their exoskeleton and then grow a new one. And eventually their exoskeleton gets too tight and they basically suffocate. So there is some downsides to having an exoskeleton. The respiratory systems of invertebrates, all animals have to take carbon dioxide and they have to get rid of it as a byproduct of that cellular metabolism. So to do this, they have to exchange with oxygen in the environment. This exchange, this trade of carbon dioxide for oxygen is called gas exchange. So things like this cuttlefish here, which is a relative of octopuses, and aquatic arthropods use gills, which are these structures here inside of this guy, use gills to exchange the air inside of water. So these are organs that consist of blood vessels that are surrounded by a membrane, and they're specialized for gas exchange in water. Gills don't work so well on land. Some other things that invertebrates have, we start to see circulatory systems. This system's role and job is to move fluid around, to transport oxygen inside of that fluid and nutrients to cells. This fluid usually picks up carbon dioxide at the cell and the waste from the cell and takes it away from there and gets rid of it. So things like sponges and cnidarians, these jellyfish here, have no circulatory system. But after you get any more complex than those, even into like roundworms and earthworms and stuff like that, they start to have circulatory systems. There are two types of schemes, or like two types of options for circulatory system. The first is an open circulatory system, where the heart pumps and then these blood goes into the space here, into like a fluid-filled space, and then eventually it's picked up on the other end and then goes into the heart. So blood pumps, blood is in this space, getting stuff, inside of it, taking oxygen to the cells, collecting carbon dioxide and wastes, and then eventually it makes its way back up to the heart. And this is an example. These are used in things like arthropods and mollusks. The other type is a closed circulatory system. This is where blood is pumped by a heart and circulates through the body in a series of closed loops. So it goes from one end goes through the body cells here, but it never leaves the vessels, and then comes through the other end and back to the heart. Even though they're not invertebrates, this is the things that are used in humans, reptiles, mammals, and amphibians. And when we talk about them later, it's important to know. Other things that invertebrates have, we start to see digestive systems. So for sponges, these digestion happens in the individual cells. In cnidarians, this central chamber around that jellyfish holds all this fluid, and this is where digestion happens. But in other organisms, they have like actual nice digestive systems with a gut, which is like including a mouth, a stomach area, intestines, and anus to get rid of it. But this system breaks down solid material, absorbs nutrients, and excretes the waste outside the body. So it gets the nutrients out of the food and then gets rid of the stuff that they can't digest so they can make room for more stuff. The nervous system of invertebrates has huge diversity. They're really small nervous systems, like things like sponges that have no neurons, and then jellyfish who can't sense where a direction's coming from. They can only tell if they're being poked. So they're really simple, all the way up to like octopuses here that have what we would consider brains, a lot of sensory information. They have a lot of cuttlefish, octopus, and squids have a lot of decision making and intelligence capability. So we see a lot of diversity inside of invertebrates as far as nervous systems go. So invertebrates, as they reproduce, many of them reproduce sexually in some form. Some, like earthworms, are hermaphrodites. And a hermaphrodite is an organism that produces both male and female gametes, allowing a single organism to be either male or female in a breeding pair. Things like snails and earthworms still breed with each other, even though they have the ability to be male or female. But because they don't see each other very often, this gives them more options. So even though they undergo sexual reproduction, even though they have both parts, they usually choose one during that mating pair, and then we'll stick with that role. So the next thing we're going to talk about is invertebrate development. Remember that development is different than reproduction. Development is how an organism grows and changes over time. So there's two strategies that invertebrates use. They use direct development and indirect development. So direct development is when a young animal is born or hatched and it has the same appearance and the way of life as an adult. So they eat the same things, they look the same. Things like grasshoppers here, this little guy, he looks like an adult grasshopper even though he's just itty bitty. Indirect development, these are animals that have intermediate larval stages. And larva is a free-living, immature form of an organism. Free-living means they don't rely on their parent. These individuals, these larvae, are usually morphologically different from the adult form and usually have a different diet. These caterpillars of the monarch butterfly here and the monarch butterfly itself have very different morphology. A, they look very different, and B, they eat different things. This guy's eating more pollen and nectar, and this guy's eating more plant material. So, while even though it's the same organism, it is very different approaches to how it's growing. So until it turns into a butterfly, it's not competing with the adult form. So next we're going to switch gears and talk about vertebrates. And vertebrates are chordates in the phylum Chordata that have a backbone. Not all chordates have a backbone, but all vertebrates do. So the classes of these organisms include things like fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. All classes except for fish live on land or live on land at some part, and their adaptations are mostly for the support of the body and conservation of water. As we move to land, the two things we needed to figure out were how to support the body and how to not dehydrate. So the first thing we're going to talk about is segmentation in these guys. All vertebrates are segmented creatures. Both the ribs and the vertebrae are segmented. Vertebrae are these repeating chunks of the backbone. And then ribs here, you can see them, they're also repeating. As vertebrates, we tend to have an endoskeleton, which is an internal skeleton made of bone and cartilage, which grows including the backbone and grows while we do. In the turtle here, I thought this was a really cool picture. Showcase that the shell of the turtle is actually part of the skeleton of the turtle, and then it's covered in an integument. But Very cool. You can also see some segmentation here as the arms are the same, the legs are the same, and then all like these ribs in vertebrae are the same. Vertebrates have a lot of morphology on their integument, which is the outer covering of an animal, while fish and amphibians are adapted to moist environments. They usually have soft skin, or amphibians even breathe through their skin, so it's really thin. Things like reptiles, birds, and mammals have much thicker integument and are adapted to the dry conditions of terrestrial environments. All animal cells have water, and we don't want them to dehydrate because if they do, they die. So usually the outer covering of an animal is watertight. As a human, like you don't lose a lot of water out of your skin. You do a sweat, but sweat's not water. It's a more protective thing. So outer coverings include protective scales, like in lizards or even birds. Their feathers have some protective nature, or it's for insulation. Things like birds and mammals, we're able to keep our body heat we're able to regulate it because we have this ability to insulate our bodies using our integument. We have for we have some respiratory and circulatory systems as vertebrates. Aquatic vertebrates are using gills for gas exchange, like we talked about earlier with the invertebrates. But vertebrates also have a lot of the groups have lungs, which are organs that are exchanged for gas exchange, organs that are adapted for gas exchange on land, and they have moist membranous surfaces. They're usually deep in an organism's body, and they do that same breathe out carbon dioxide, intake oxygen. We have closed circulatory systems as vertebrates with multi-chambered hearts. In fish, they have two chambers, excuse me. In amphibia, they have three. In reptilia, they have 3.5, 4, because they have this incomplete septum here that's not separating the two ventricles completely. And then in birds and mammals, our heart is completely segmented and it has 4 full chambers, fully developed chambers. So this splits oxygenated blood coming from the lungs and deoxygenated blood coming from the body, so there's no mixing of the two. Reptiles and amphibians, they mix their oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood, but this is a good kind of thing for them because they can hold their breath longer. Some other vertebrate characteristics here, we have digestive and excretory systems. Digestive systems is important in digestion. It occurs in the gut of the organisms, starts at the mouth, ends at the anus. It takes all of the nutrients out and gets rid of all the waste. In many vertebrates, the gut is long and folded to increase the surface area. So the longer that the gut is, the more time it spends in there, the more ability you are to absorb all the nutrients and water back out of it. The human digestive tract itself is 23 feet long, so that's kind of cool. We also have to deal with toxic ammonia produced by the body while still conserving our water. That's our excretory system. So for this, we have the main organ of the kidney, which filters waste from the blood and regulates water levels. This stuff that we pull out, this ammonia, is really toxic, so we usually dilute it in urine so that it's not toxic. But that's why it's important to stay hydrated and to not let those concentrations build up. The next thing we're going to talk about is the nervous system of vertebrates. Vertebrates tend to have highly organized brains, even like fish compared to invertebrates. Their nervous system varies greatly. You can see there's a lot of differences between my fish brain here and the human brain down here. So, while fish have the ability to sense their environment, they're very limited in their ability to think and make decisions. They're kind of programmed as a response happens, they respond to it. But for more complex organisms like dogs, they have flexible behavior, social patterns. They can kind of take in more information from their environment and then make decisions based off it, go based on smell or sight or sound. Vertebrates have some different modes of reproduction here. They're mostly sexual reproductive kind of organisms. Fish and amphibians usually release gametes into the water and fertilization takes place. You've seen like ponds with frog eggs over the top. Those are fertilized, probably growing. In reptiles, birds, and mammals, we'll do internal fertilization where the egg and sperm unite within the body of the female. This increases the likelihood of fertilization. It's not kind of leaving it up to random chance that it'll happen in the water. It's kind of like being more thoughtful about it. The fertilized eggs of many fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and birds develop outside the body, nourished by the egg yolk. There is some examples of mammals that do. This is a monotreme, this is an echidna, and this is his egg there. So there are like 5 mammal species that still lay eggs. The rest of us give live birth. But in not just mammals, in the zygotes of some fishes, amphibians, reptiles, and most of our mammals, bar these 5 guys, the zygotes develop in the mother and are nourished by the mother's blood supply. Things like snakes are born live. And the last thing we're going to talk about is vertebrate development. Most of these mammals are undergoing direct development. Most mammals and other vertebrates undergo direct development, like this lizard here. These babies look exactly like their mom there. The young and the adult can share the same resources. This is good if there's a lot of those. It also allows for greater maternal and paternal bonding to the children. It doesn't happen in all species, but it does happen in some. And then things like amphibians and fishes sometimes do have larval stages, so they're indirectly developing. This guy, lays these eggs, and these little larvae here look nothing like the adult frog. And this is the conclusion of 32.2.